it is a virtue. You need to be patient because there's so many things that can go out of your control. Life will throw you balls that you need to juggle with. And I know many of you have heard the expression when the desirable is not available, the available becomes your desirable, right? So when in Rome, behave like the Romans, and that is how I found myself speaking Spanish as my third language. Hello and welcome to Dorcas Diaries Making Memories. And today I wanted to share with you how I became a Spanish speaker out of necessity and for survival reasons. So, for a lot of people, or can I say for many videos that I've seen on language acquisitions here on YouTube, the majority of people who learn a new language do it out of passion, out of the need to climb up their career ladder, or just, out of love because they fell in love with someone who speaks a different language. And just like the English, some people are forced to learn the language because they were dominated by the owners of the language that they speak. For those of you who know, English was not a very widely used language, even though they fell under the Germanic languages, but it became what it is today thanks to the nomads who invaded the United Kingdom back in the centuries ago. And this is what the English have made of it today. Up to the 19th or 18th century, there were still places where administrative work and education was administered or delivered in French. And today you find out that we borrow from the English borrow from the French, but at the base of everything I'm trying to say is that when there is a need for survival, you will learn a language you never thought to learn. So, personally, I knew about Spanish language while I was still a young adult in Nigeria. I think in my late teens, yeah, through the TV series called When You're Mine. But those of you who are from Nigeria will popularly know it as Paloma, because that was the star actress of that TV show. So that was my first exposure to Spanish language that I can actually remember. And after that, when I went to Congo to know my Congolese side of the family, there was another series called Marimar, that was also showing in Spanish. And one thing that I found interesting is that the language is quite an emotional one, where the women especially talk with gesticulations, body languages, kind of a bit like, we African women, especially West African women do, with the rolling of the eye, with the swinging of the hands, and, things like that. So I was raised up speaking English and French. And basically, I went to school in Nigeria. I was raised by Francophone parents, so I learned English at school. And my parents thought if their children speak those two languages, they could go to anywhere, at least on the continent of Africa, because Spanish is not spoken on our continent except in Guinea, I think Guinea, Equatorial Guinea, yeah. And it's just a small portion of the capital that has Spanish as its official language. So when we decided to move down to Ecuador, we started learning language, which is Spanish, because we realized on the internet that Spanish was their official language, and the the only thing we thought of doing at that time, or that we could do, was to download an app and learn. So personally, I downloaded Duolingo and Memrise, and I started learning. But what I understood when I got to Quito was that I had learned nothing. So at the time, this was how Duolingo was operating. They would give you flashcards, you would learn words, you would learn phrases and pictures, and you would memorize them. And if you got the answers correct, you would go to the next level. What it didn't offer you was real life conversations, so you didn't know if all that information you were acquiring was important or was going to prove useful in a real life situation. So we move and we travel, we get to Quito, and the first thing that comes out of the mouth of our host is que Dios les bendiga. And then this person is like, okay, saying what? Um, that is not the same. But because I understood French, the only thing that came to my mind was Dios, which in French is Dieu. So I said, oh, probably they are saying, may God bless you. And I answered. But that was the last time we spoke French. For the next 8 hours till we will arrive at our destination, which is the city where I live. And along the way, we were just mute. People will just, our host will just use sign language. Hello, Martin, how are you? And they would just do this to ask if we wanted to eat, or if we got to the gas station or the filling station. In British English, we say filling station. They would point to the toilet and they would ask if we needed to use the restrooms, and we would say yes or no. And when we got here, we were received by the pastor, our host pastor, with two of his church members who were studying English at the time at the university. And it was such a relief, to have someone speak your language directly. And thank you. So, when they met us and we explained ourselves to them, um, I just remember that feeling of relief, that feeling of finally I can speak to someone who can understand me. And it reminded me of what Nelson Mandela said. Mandela said, if you speak to someone who, in a language he understands, you speak to his head. But if you speak to someone in their own language, you speak to their heart. Okay. And while English is not my language, English is our official language back there in Africa, it was heartwarming, it was comforting, reassuring that there would be a way out of that. So fast forward to the first week, we realized that we were not prepared. Duolingo had not helped, Memrise didn't help. So now we had to practically begin to actively learn the languages. We went to church because we are missionaries, and we had to preach. My husband now had to preach through an interpreter. And I realized there was that gap, they didn't understand African languages. What happens here in, I think, on South American continent is that their teachers come from two groups. It's either they are Native Americans, by which I mean from the United States, or Spaniards who have learned English language and now teach that language to their fellow countrymen. So they were not used to an African accent. We were like the very first Africans that they had ever come in contact with. And that was a bit difficult. Now, for myself, I began to realize that I was handicapped. And I'm a very, very independent person. I wanted to be able to go out. I wanted to go do shopping. Hello, Abel Ramirez. How are you? Welcome to the show. And wanted to go shopping. We wanted to do a reconnoissance of our neighborhood. We couldn't, the buses would pass by, but we couldn't say, "Adonde va?" "Adonde store?" We couldn't ask where the bus was going to. We couldn't ask for directions. So we were limited. And you can imagine, for people who are independent, who love going out to walk, who love going to do their own shopping, we were really limited. And I told myself, you know what? I need to do better. What happened next was thanks to the system here in Ecuador, where internet is accessible to everybody, or almost every home here. You don't have to buy data. Most houses have internet. So I went on YouTube, and I was very, very blessed to have a teacher from Mexico who was teaching Spanish to English speakers. And that was how I started learning. So what he would do was he would take a verb. For example, he would take the verb to be, which in Spanish is to, ser and estar. And then he would give us sentences. So he would say, estoy feliz, for example, and he would say that in English. Then he would say the past tense of estoy is estaba. Can you make a sentence but change it to this thing? So he gave us like building blocks so that we could form our own materials and immediately begin to speak, as opposed to what you get in textbooks where they take that same a star and start breaking the tenses when it's used, when it's no. He just gave us the tools on how to begin to make sentences. So he would take that same estar and say, put it in the future tense. The future of estar is estaré, which in English we don't have. In Spanish we have the future tense, literally formed, when you conjugate it. And that was how I began to speak. And with friends at church, they began to give me tools. And from there, what I began to do was I would take the church songbooks and bring it home, because I finally found out that most of the words they were saying in Spanish were similar to what we used in in French. For example, they say la palabra. In French, we say la parole. They say el hombre. We say homme. They say la fe. We say le foi. Similarities like that. Even though my app couldn't interpret directly from what the minister would be preaching, I was able to read lips. I began to read their lips. I began to pick up their accents. And that was how I started speaking. But this is what gave me another push. When we needed to buy things for ourselves, like your daily supplies, groceries, we couldn't go out, and I felt handicapped because there were a few people who had a little understanding of English language, and they would ask for the list from us, and then they would go shopping. But I wanted to do that for myself, and when I asked, this lady told me that normally when the merchants or the people in the market, the traders, discover that you were not Spanish speaking, they would take advantage, and that's why they didn't let us go to shop. So I told her, okay, how about you take me shopping with you? And so she started taking me shopping, and one incident really shook me, and it made me realize, somebody once said that if you don't hit rock bottom, you will not seek the change that you desire. Most times we wish for something, but until we get to that place where we are tired of being tired, we are fed up of being fed up, then we will make that move, okay? And I got to that point that day when we went shopping, because she would buy the things on my list and buy the things on our list, and then the grocer will give us a bill and she would pay. But that day I realized that for the same quantity of groceries or vegetables that we had bought, my price was higher, because finally he caught on that I was a foreigner. And so, excuse me, he charged me a little bit higher. And I told her, I said, he did this because he thinks I'm a foreigner, right? And she didn't know how to, and that was a breaking point for me. So I began to write words of the grocery thing. So I would write like tomato, tomate, cebolla, onions, arroz, rice, leche, milk. So I'll make a list in Spanish and I'll make a list in English. And I'll take the bus and go to the market and shop. Or if I went to the supermarket where I didn't have to speak to anybody, I would just go with my phone. And I had a very uh, good dictionary translator that works offline, which is a Spanish dish. Is very, very, very important. It helped me, and I still use it to today. It translates as well as it's a dictionary. So I would look at maybe something look like milk. I'll take the name down and I'll translate it to English. And that was how I started speaking Spanish. That was how Spanish became my third language. It was because I needed to survive in a Spanish speaking country. I've seen a lot of videos where some people take 1 month to read, learn, read, write, conjugate grammar rules in 1 month. It's a challenge, but personally, that feels like suffering to me. I don't have that kind of willpower. I feel things should flow naturally, and that was how it came to me. At first, I was quite hesitant. I was making mistakes here and there, and the people would laugh at me, but that fear of not being made fun of was I think, a secret weapon that tomorrow I was going to speak better so that I wasn't made fun of. And it really worked because prior to our arrival, there were Spanish speakers who had decided to learn English just to make our stay more comfortable. But when I arrived and they found out that no, I was speaking up their language quite easily, they just abandoned their classes. So they are laughing at me, they are making fun of my mistakes was motivation for me to speak because I needed to find my way about. I needed to go about, I needed to be able to go to the hospital by myself. I was not going to have an interpreter, partake of my private discussions with a doctor, So I would sit down, have the conversation in my head, and translate, save the translation, memorize what I could, just to make it easy for the doctor. And we will talk, So I would memorize all my symptoms, the signs, and then I'll go to the hospital, I'll go to this clinic and tell the doctor everything. And that's how I started speaking. Now, as missionaries, we couldn't go far because there are, like I said at the beginning, there are very few people who work as interpreters. You may get translators, you may get teachers, but because most of them are not quite religious, it's very difficult, at least in the city where I live, to find a very apt or experienced um, interpreter that is willing to stand and speak verbatim, word for word, while you are preaching. So that was another thing. So we had an international conference, and when they discovered that there was a visiting missionary from Africa, they wanted to hear him address the audience. And so my pastor asked me if I could interpret for my husband. I was terrified, and he just said, no, just 5 minutes. 5 minutes is all we're asking. Just say something, greet the church, introduce yourselves so that the people can know how to invite you to their churches and things like that. And I succeeded. I succeeded in doing that. And that was when the way to hell became paved with good intentions. From just presenting myself, people were like, oh no, she understands. She understands our language better. It doesn't matter the mistakes. They can start preaching. And so that was how we began our missionary work here in Ecuador. My husband would write out his sermon, and I would translate it before he went to preach. And gradually, I started speaking, more fluently. I could easily now translate from my head. Why do I share this story with you today? The first thing I want you to know is that the beginning of anything you want to do, whether it's a dream or it's a goal, is difficult. And the more you are sure of it and you pursue it, the easier it becomes. Two, when you are sure and you believe in that dream or that goal, you will find the means. Because what happened was that when we came here, we thought we would find a language school where we could learn Spanish, just like you have in Nigeria, where we have English schools for expatriates. We didn't find that, my friends. There was no school, there were only English schools, and I needed to learn Spanish, you see. So I had to find the means to learn the language. That is number two. You will find a way, okay? Number three, which is the most important that I want to leave with you, is that if you are focused on your goals, the voices of the naysayers will not affect you. I can promise you, in Guayaquil, where I live, we laugh, or they laugh, about anything and everything. But for me, that mocking, that mockery, that making fun of my wrong grammatical this thing, my poor conjugation of sentences or tenses, was rather a motivational factor for me. It pushed me because I knew and believed that I had to, I really had to speak the language. So it didn't matter that I couldn't speak it well. It didn't matter that people were making a mockery of me. It didn't matter that some people thought I would never speak it well. There were people who could see the effort I was making and encouraged me, And that is what I want to leave with you today. That majority of people are going to make fun of you. Even if as a content creator, while I'm here live, there are people who have come here while I'm live and written nasty comments while I'm talking. But I just ignore it and I continue. So if you have 100 people, I can tell you right now, you will have 80 people who will be against you, either angry or mocking you or distracting you for some reason. And you will have that 20% that will support you in whatever way they know how to support you. So at the end of the day, you have to believe in yourself, you have to rely on yourself and do things for yourself and receive whatever help you can along the way. If you receive it, fine. If you don't receive it, fine. Pursue that dreams. We have what today is the 7th, so we have barely, I think, 21 days, 3 weeks to the new year. What is that goal that you are pursuing? What is that dream that you've been dreaming of? Bring it to realization. It doesn't matter how long, it doesn't matter how slow or how fast. Use the resources you have right now and begin to make that dream come true or make that goal a reality. Thank you, and I wish you a very wonderful weekend. Bye bye.